This is TLV1.
The Tel Aviv Review.
Hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review. I'm your host, Gilad Halpern.
And I'm Yael Barda.
Every week we bring you conversations with authors about their books and research and other things that we like. And if you like us, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter by going to our homepage. That's tlv1.fm/Tel Aviv Review. Scroll down to the bottom and click the big red button that says Patreon. Click and support us. Some of you have been doing this for months and years, and we cannot thank you enough. Our guest today is a professor of history at Penn State University, although he is a sociologist by training. His research focuses on Palestinian politics and culture in the State of Israel, and he has published several books on the topic, most recently The Optimist, a social biography of Tawfiq Zayad, which tells the story of one of the foremost Palestinian politicians and intellectuals in Israel of the 1970s, 80s, and 90s. The book was published by Stanford University Press in 2020, that's in English, and also in Arabic by Madar in Ramallah, and now, brand new, in Hebrew by Pardes. Professor Tamir Sorek, hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review.
Hello, thank you for inviting me.
So why Tawfiq Zayad? There are other, perhaps more high-profile figures in the history of the Palestinian community in Israel. I can think of, Emil Habibi or Tawfiq Tubi, and of course, Azmi Bishara for a more contemporary example. Why Zayad?
Well, I can say why personally I decided to write the biography of Tawfiq Zayad. I worked on other topics related to the Palestinians in Israel, and my previous book was about the Palestinian commemoration in Israel. And in different moments and different junctures in the history of the Palestinians in Israel, I've noticed that he was central. Again and again, his image raised. Either if we're talking about Land Day in 1976, the general strike that is considered a watershed in the politics of the Palestinians in Israel, and later as a member of the parliament who fulfilled a central role.
So just to say, he was a member of Knesset for the Communist Party for about 20 years, and also the mayor of Nazareth, and one perhaps the most prominent position within Arab politics in Israel.
Yes, he was the first mayor of Nazareth who was elected against the will of the government. In fact, he was the first communist mayor in the Middle East. And he was also a member of the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, from 1974 to 1990, and again from 1992 until his death in 1994. But I think he is most known in the Palestinian world, in the Arab world, as a national poet. And here it is something that it is important to understand, because the Communist Party in the 50s, in the 1960s, had two organs. They had the poets, the intellectuals, who promoted a revolutionary discourse, utopic vision, anti-colonialist style. And you had the politicians who promoted mundane issues for the citizens. And there is a tension between the two. They do not always go together, and it is not a coincidence that you find a little overlap between them. However, Tawfiq Zayad is unique because he was among the poet, no doubt, but he is the poet who went the farther, the most extensive way in his political career. As you said, as a mayor and as a member of parliament, and I think the most important leader in a crucial moment in the early 90s in Israel.
So the title of one of the first chapters is Steadfastness. And it's rarely addressed by Israelis or even other authors that are not Palestinian. And you place it at the fulcrum of the story. Why?
Well, I've been studying Palestinian narrative for decades. So in a way, I listened to people, and in a way, I adopted some of their vocabulary and some of their own interpretation of social and political reality. And for the Palestinians in Israel, it is a central theme. especially after 1948, with the permanent sense that who knows if they will be next. Like almost every Palestinian knew someone, family members, friends, who were beyond the borders. And there was a sense of an urgency of making an effort to stay, not giving up. So it is a central theme that, in a way, I adopted it from my interviewer, and from the literature that I read throughout the years in Arabic.
And what is the role of Zayad in making steadfastness this kind of political, cultural, right? It's also a poetic but policy kind of idea. What is his role in it?
Zayad set an example of merging a practical work. He was a member of the local council in Nazareth with a very principled and proud standing in front of the military rule. What he was doing in the first meeting of the local council after the election, after he became a member, standing in front of the officer of the military governor and telling him upfront, you are not welcome here. This is something that is remembered by people. This is, I think it is a constitutive event of saying, well, yeah, we live under military rule. But
this is the military government of 1949 till 1966.
Yes, I have to say, after the war in 1948, the Palestinians in Israel, most of them were put under a military regime that extremely and strictly limited their freedom of movement, freedom of expression, freedom of organization. It dictated many aspects of their life, and including involvement in local politics. So Tawfiq Zayad stood there and was talking back to the military governor, stating that it doesn't make sense for a military officer to sit in a meeting of the local council. Later in 1955, Tawfiq Zayad was tortured in prison, and it became a myth of heroism in his party, but also in other, in wider circles of the Palestinians in Israel. Even later, when other Palestinians were tortured, and it was reported in Al-Ittihad, the journal of the Communist Party, it was referred as that he got the treatment of Tawfiq Zayad. The mythical element of this story is even expressed by the vocabulary used in Al-Ittihad. They said that Zayad was crucified. Like there was maybe an element there that was maybe similar to crucifixion, but it is a choice that certainly tried to make a mythology out of the story.
Zayad himself embodies a very interesting story, in the broader context, and that is of the pervasiveness of the Communist Party in Palestinian, Arab Palestinian politics in Israel in the first decades of the state. And I want to ask you about this, really, how his communism informed his nationalist politics. I mean, there is some contradiction, obviously, between the two. So I'd like to ask you how he negotiated or tried to harmonize these two very separate elements, and what was really Zayad's role in instilling communist politics in the broader Palestinian politics in Israel at the time.
In Nazareth, there has never been tension between national politics, nationalist politics, and communism. The two political orientations emerged simultaneously in the same period. And the same activists who were fighting anti-Zionism were also the activists who organized the workers. So if we talk about in terms of networks of political activists, they were the same circles. And for Zayad, there was it became for him a natural merging of these two orientations. And also his nationalism was never a chauvinist nationalism. So at the same time that he was fighting for the rights of the Palestinian people, he always tried to do it within the context of an Arab-Jewish class-based struggles. You can see it from the very early stage of his activism. Even after in 1954, he was put under house arrest and got very severe restrictions because the military regime wanted to prevent him from continuing talking in the villages around. And he sent a letter to every mayor, Jew or Arab in Israel, protesting, saying, what happened to me might happen to you later. You cannot divide this treatment, and be aware. In terms of class solidarity, he has a very famous poem he wrote in 1957 with solidarity of the workers of Atta. Atta was a very big and important factory, textile factory, but most of the workers were Jews. And when they were striking for their own rights, the Communist Party supported them, but Tawfiq Zayed even went farther with writing of this poem of solidarity. He did not see any contradiction between being in solidarity with Jewish workers and demanding the return of the Palestinian refugees, demanding freedom for the Palestinian people, demanding equality between Palestinians and Israelis. For him, it was in the same area.
But the flip side of this story is really how well received these ideas were among his constituencies, and not just his, the party's constituency. And the fact that, to the onlooker, it sounds very strange that a traditional, economically not very developed society adopts these rather, very progressive revolutionary ideas that communism brings on.
Communism has been the most successful in agricultural context, to the surprise of Karl Marx himself, if he could have seen the revolution in the Soviet Union. So in terms of, it is not an outlier.
Alongside his communist ideology and also practice, so he was very, very secular. And I wonder, how would Zayed fit in today's political discourse on Palestinian nationalism, given the shift away from secularism? Would he have evolved? Would he be able to turn his discourse into one that would encompass also the traditional and the religious?
That's a very good question. And I would say that in many ways, when people ask me what would have Zayed said about the current political circumstances, 2-state, 1-state, then it's difficult to predict. But in this particular issue of the relations to the role of political Islam, he has been quite consistent. From the moment he identified the emerging trend of political Islam, he was unconditionally and without any ambiguity against any role of religion in politics. And it is easy for me to see that he would have remained loyal to the same principles. Because I didn't see even a hint of compromise in his rhetoric, in his political tactic, and with the current debates among Palestinians, especially Palestinians of Israel, regarding gay rights, regarding gender segregations, and in general, the place of religion in politics. He has been so consistent, and I think he would have been part of the very consistent and clear path that will prevent this role of political Islam. Even yesterday, I was in a meeting with Mendel Associates, the Mendel Center for Leadership. And some of the Palestinian associates who were in the conversation said exactly that. They wish today there was Tawfiq Zayad, that will show the way to his party, because his party not always was consistent on these issues, and they were convinced that Tawfiq Zayad would have been much clearer and take the party into a more coherent direction toward that.
I want to go back to what you said earlier about politicians and intellectuals within the Communist Party and the role that Zayad played in both, that even more than this pretty, front bench politician in the Communist Party was a well-known poet even beyond the borders of the State of Israel. And ask you, maybe you can elaborate on how his poetry, which was always infused with a lot of communist themes, this is also pretty common among intellectuals in the Soviet bloc. I mean, there was this whole genre of political art and poetry, and ask you how Zayad himself translated it in a local context to the Palestinian cause, and maybe afterwards also ask you as a biographer how his poetry helped you write his biography, because you do say that many of his poems are autobiographical. One of the commentators that you quote in the book said that his poetry was more political than artistic, so really for the purposes of
more biographical than artistic.
More biographical, sorry, yeah. So maybe you can also comment on that. So really, how his communist poetry informed his politics in the specific context of a Palestinian living in Israel.
I don't know if his poetry informed his politics. His politics informed his poetry. This is how I see it, and his artistic creation was very political. I will give just one example. In the mid-1960s, he started a project of collecting stories from the elders in the villages and some folklore stories. And there are two movements here that he's doing. First, arguing that the popular culture is important by itself. This is a sort of a class statement. But even in the stories, very clearly, he provided his own bent to make it a very class-oriented, socialist, atheist, clearly. So there was certainly certain class elements in his artistic work. And Tawfiq Zayad did not leave much explicit memories. Sometimes the work of a biography is easier when the protagonist left many autobiographical materials, diaries and memoirs, almost nothing. Really, there are certain points that in the book I highlight, here is a rare moment when we have something. But I didn't have them, and therefore, in many cases, I looked at the poems, at the poets, in order to find the way he experienced certain events. I think one of the most prominent example that I elaborate a lot in the book is the War of 1973. That was very traumatic for Jewish Israelis, but for many Arabs, and Palestinians in particular, it was a moment of recovery, of pride. Like, well, we are not these helpless victims of 1948 and 1967 that you could defeat us with no problem. Here, we gave a real fight. And you can see in the poem that he wrote about it, that is known as the Great Cross, the Great Crossing, that he's proud of what happened. It was very difficult for the Israeli public to read it. It created significant turmoil, and there were demands to withdraw his parliamentary immunity. The ritual that we've known since then with other Palestinian members of the parliament. But this is a moment where you can tell what certain historical events, in what way it affected Tawfiq Zayad.
But also, there was one thing that I thought you were going to say, and you didn't, and I'm interested in that, is that during his time in Parliament, almost 20 years, he didn't write any poetry at all, or almost at all. So, in a way, can you say that his activism substituted his artistic endeavor? I mean, I'm trying to think what it was like, these two tracks in his mind and how they interacted with each other.
Yes, but I would articulate it a little bit different. I don't think it's activism that was in tension with poetry. What was in tension is writing revolutionary, mythical poetry and sitting in the Israeli parliament. Here was the tension. I think it certainly depleted him from his poetic eros in a way. When he was asked about it, what about writing poetry? And he said, I don't have enough time for that. But I think there was something much deeper here, that there was a contradiction. His speeches in the parliament mostly were quite dry, full of numbers. It was not Tawfiq Zayad.
He was a communist after all. Yeah.
No, but it was not Tawfiq Zayad of the popular rallies in the Palestinian public. When he mobilized people with a very figurational language, with enthusiasm, he was very charismatic when he was talking in these political rallies. This is not Tawfiq Zayad of the Knesset. And therefore, I can say that there is a tension between the two. There are some exceptions, and it is important to look at these exceptions. One exception is a satirical poem he wrote in Hebrew about his fighting with Rehavam Ze'evi.
The far-right politician. Former general. Yeah.
So this was the only poem I know that he wrote in Hebrew. This is an anecdote. Something that is less anecdotal is when he wrote in a discussion about the Oslo Accord, in which he really believed. He, for the only time that I paid attention to, he cited his own poetry translated to Hebrew, because I think in this moment he felt something that was beyond the day-to-day politics, that there was a sense of historical change, and therefore his poems came to the front.
That's wonderful. You write about your positionality as being an Israeli scholar that is writing about, you're studying up Palestinian elite, and you're studying up Palestinian leader, and in a very, very different way that any other Israeli historians usually would. And you also talk about that positionality a little bit, almost like an anthropologist. I mean, you really devote moments there, and you can see your relationship to that. And I'm so curious to know how, why, and where you stand on that.
How did I come to be who I am as a researcher in this position at that moment?
No, I think specifically like in this book, and the fact that you do devote time to that positionality.
It is something that initially, when I started my research on Palestinians in Israel, I was more on the sociology side, and I was not aware before I went to the field to the importance of my positionality. But it takes time and many years in the field to understand that I bring with me my identity, and the people whom I met see this identity, and whatever they're saying, any text that is coming out from them is part of their own performance, and it is unavoidable. So I learned to interpret what I hear as the way my interviewees presents themselves in front of Jewish Israelis. Sometimes in some of my books, this insight is on the surface, like me and my interviewees are talking about it. So every moment, every second I'm in the field, I'm aware of that, and I cannot ignore it. So my positionality is clear in the moment of interviews, but also in the moment of writing. Like the way I interpret reality is related to my own biography. It is unavoidable. But it took me some time to understand I learned theory of reflexivity, but I did not deeply understand it only after many years of what it means.
I want to maybe fast forward to the end of his life, and ask you maybe to take a retrospective look on his whole life and career from the very end point, and ask you how his communist worldview or political worldview in general evolved over the years, especially in light of the collapse of the Soviet Union and the repercussions that it had for the Palestinians, namely the Oslo Accords that came in its wake.
So we have two issues here, the collapse of the Soviet Union and the Oslo Accord. The collapse of the Soviet Union was in the air for several years. And this was very hard for Tawfiq Zayad. Just for a background, the Israeli Communist Party was considered the most loyal party to the Soviet Union.
In the world?
Yeah, it was one of the most loyal parties. And there was a reason for that. Because for the Palestinian members, the danger of a Zionist version of communism was always in the air, under Zionist hegemony. And a way to secure that was this complete loyalty to the Soviet Union. And I think Tawfiq Zayad embodied this in a very strong way. He never explicitly talked about it that this is the reason. He did see the Soviet Union as the big hope of humanity. And
so loyalty to the Soviet Union as some sort of a shield of a potential Zionist spillover into the communism?
Yes,
right,
certainly. And when his good friend and colleague in the party, Emil Habibi, was supporting the perestroika and the glasnost in the Soviet Union, Tawfiq Zayad was very concerned. He was concerned where it will go. And he really attacked Emil Habibi about it. Emil Habibi became a lightning rod for the existential threat that Tawfiq Zayad felt at the time. This is my interpretation of what was going on there. It was very difficult for him. And in the end, the Soviet Union disappeared. Emil Habibi had this metaphor about the birds who left the cage, and then when they wanted to return, there was no cage anymore. And he said it even before the collapse of the Soviet Union, and now it became so real. Tawfiq Zayad learned to live with the absence of the Soviet Union. And then he said, look, for us, the Soviet Union was an instrument to fulfill certain principles, but the principles are still there. If you read the history of how enthusiastic he was about the Soviet Union, it was something very emotional. It was not only instrumental. But this is how he interpreted it after the fact, after the Soviet Union did not exist anymore. And he said in an interview to the Syrian television, he said about that, look, history has different, is convoluted, is going ups and down, but there is a direction. And humanity is going toward progress. Maybe you cannot see it if you look in this very close, from a very close distance. But if we take the perspective, you can see that we are always and constantly in progress. And he believed in that. He really believed in that. He even used the metaphor of peasants, of falah. When we look at a plant, when the peasant plant a tree, they don't just look at it for waiting for it to grow. You take a distance, you come back, and after a while it grows. This is how he understood history. And it helped him to get over this crisis of the collapse of the Soviet Union.
And what about the Oslo Accords?
The Oslo Accord for him was the fulfillment or the beginning of the fulfillment of his vision of a brotherhood of nations. He believed that it will lead to a two-state solution, a solution that the Soviet Union and the Communist Party has supported since 1947, even. And when I say two-state solution, I want to clarify that in his idea, it is not the we are there and they are there and we are here and they are there. For him, it is
which was the Jewish-Israeli formulation of it.
Yeah, the left Zionist interpretations of two-state solution.
Or politics of separation.
Yeah, he was against separation. He wanted free borders. He never renounced the right of return of the Palestinian refugees. He never talked about the practical way of compromise, but I assume he did think about a certain way of compromise. He believed that it is solvable, keeping the rights of return and still having two states. So, and he repeatedly reminded his audience that this is our solution. We are winning the historical debate. All those who oppose us, either in the Israeli rights or in the Palestinian who opposed the compromise, we are winning the historical fight. One thing more I want to say about the Oslo process, that from the very beginning, he identified the problem, said, you did not agree on the major issues. We have the refugees we didn't talk about. We have the settlements. We have Jerusalem. We have whether even there is a Palestinian state, you did not sign on it. And these will be mines on the road. If you don't take care of it, and you should take care of it early, we will have a problem. So he saw the problem, but he was so optimistic that the metaphor he used for what is happening is that a big rock that's starting to fall from the mountain, and there is no power in the world that can stop it.
Wow. It's so amazing, huh? Like we're in this period of time with what's going on inside Israel. The first time, Israelis are actually significantly out in the streets fighting for their own liberal citizenship, and people in Jenin are being forced out of their houses, and all this stuff is so far from Zayad's vision.
Well, apparently someone did stop that rock rolling down from the mountaintop.
Yeah, it did stop. It did stop.
Yeah, what are we going to? So this perhaps leads us to my final question, unless Yael has more. To what extent does his politics and his whole worldview live on to this day? What is really his legacy in Israeli politics, in Palestinian politics, in the broader conflict?
There could be several, but I will focus on one of them. And this is the need for a joint Jewish-Arab struggle and the inability to separate the rights of Palestinians from rights of Israelis. And this is relevant certainly for today's politics in Israel, when around the protests there is always the debate about bringing the occupation into it, bringing the issue of Jewish supremacy.
And it's still the line of the Communist Party, interestingly enough.
Yeah, the current leader of the Jabha, of the Democratic Front, Ayman Odeh, see himself as someone who continues the ideological and political way of Tawfiq Zayad, and he is steady gaining every opportunity. If you want your democracy, you cannot ignore our rights. There is no way to separate. And he's using similar words that Zayad was using along the way, reminding the Israelis that they cannot oppress another people and expect to be free.
Does he and his colleagues in the party still cite him as their hero?
Frequently, yes. Yes. His poems especially are frequently cited in political rallies, and people sing songs. Fortunately for his poems, some of them gained melodies and music, so they are being remembered even better than just by citing them.
Professor Tamir Sorek, author of the biography of Tawfiq Zayad, The Optimist. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
And also many thanks to you, Yael, and to Itai Shalem, the manager of TLV1 Studios. And now we've got a request, because most of you listen to us on the Apple Podcast app, and would like to ask you to please consider writing us a review of any kind, good, bad, ugly, up to you. You too can support us by going to our website, that's tlv1.fm/Tel Aviv Review, and subscribing onto a Patreon campaign. Check out our archive, it has probably up to 1,000 interviews. You can like us on Facebook, follow me and Yael on Twitter, and most important, join us again next week for another edition of the Tel Aviv Review, and until then from us here in Tel Aviv, goodbye.